remember specifically during LBJ's time, he focused a lot more on community programs as alternatives to incarceration. And there was a lot of money going into that kind of work. You know, that, I mean, there was a time when community organizers actually got paid to be community organizers. And I think that was work that was very important because it focused a lot on making sure that people, either you prevented incarceration period or you made sure they got back to the community as soon as possible. And you worked hard to keep them connected to the community, to their families. So it made for a much more, I would say, positive way of working with people. So I just wanted to say, I think it's been a lot of like that.
Yeah, I think over the years there's always been a pendulum shift
Yes.
in our society, and unfortunately for those of us who live in this country, we understand that a lot of these issues become politicized, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. And it's important that I say that as we have this conversation today, that I think that as we move forward in this work, we've forgotten the human element surrounding social issues that impact our society, because like most issues, even as today, what we're seeing in this country, they become politicized in a way that we're not operating from a humane perspective or a humane lens. We find ourselves usually operating from a very different place that's not reflective of the values that we hold dearly in our society and that we believe to be the essence of our society as a whole. So I think we'll stop there and I'll see where.
Well, one question I wanted to ask, I listen to WNYC every morning. It's how I wake up in the morning. And some years ago, they were interviewing somebody, I think, in Brooklyn, and he said that he was a drug dealer, and he sold weed mostly. And they said, "Aren't you afraid of saying on NPR and WNYC that you're a drug dealer?" He says, "No, I'm not afraid. I'm white." And that just really shocked me. And of course, it's absolutely correct. There is a different set of rules for white people and a different set of rules for people of color. And I wonder if you speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I think there's probably is always the elephant in the room within our criminal legal system, but I hope that in recent news, what we saw in Tennessee is a direct reflection of what we see nationally and trends that happen nationally, where you have two black state legislators who were expelled for the exact same issue that Mrs. Jones was, I think it was Mrs. Johnson, I'm sorry, wasn't. And that has always been a parallel, what we talk about when the famous book, The Tale of Two Cities. What we have right in our society today is the tale of two justices, and how that plays out in the lives of black and brown folks within our criminal legal system, as opposed to how that plays out to whites. And I'm thankfully you brought up the issue surrounding marijuana, because it was right, and we do not have to go to nowhere down south or nothing like that. Right here in New York City, there was a New York Times report that showed that if you want to be arrested or incarcerated for marijuana, be black or brown. That was the headline. And it noted that the same number of people in black and brown in those communities that were arrested for marijuana, we had the same number of people that were white that were stopped or whatever that may be. NYPD at that time, from the report, stated that, well, it was based upon the 311 calls. And this reporter decided to dig deeper, and what he learned was that the same number of calls that came from the black and brown communities are the same number of calls that came from the east side or as it relates to marijuana, but the only thing that was different was who was arrested, who was sent to Rikers Island. And I think that as we continue to have these conversations such as this, I think that one of the things that I share with my students, that we're going to have some very real and brave conversations to acknowledge that as it relates to our criminal legal system, there's always discriminatory practices as it relates to one's race and what that looks like within our judicial system and the outcomes for those individuals who may be in our systems.
Thank
If
you.
that answered it.
That answers the question. So, shall we move?
Sure. So I just wanted to call back a little bit to some of the things that Terrance mentioned before we got officially started, which was the narrative building, and basically what our penal system has become is really just a response to people that are stricken by poverty. The war on drugs is something that you brought up as well earlier, which is often like the main topic of conversation when we discuss mass incarceration, specifically the hot topic of nonviolent drug offenses. I feel like most people, even if you don't know too much about the criminal justice system, those are kind of like buzzwords that you usually relate to that particular topic. The war on drugs was often brought up in conversations of mass incarceration, and it is true that it has revolutionized, and much like the other legislation, but I'll just use that as the prime example, it's revolutionized the way that the United States talks about crime, how it views and how it responds to crime. Most specifically, I believe that it has greatly impacted how governmental candidates and the media creates discourse around these particular topics. In the years that have followed Nixon's response to the poverty-stricken, most people talk about they're not really comfortable with being soft on crime, viewed as soft on crime, viewed as wanting to be or push legislation that is more rehabilitative. Mostly, we have seen and we continue to see that they're, trying to be this beacon of hope to respond to whatever crackdown or rise in crime that happens to be rather convenient for whatever they're trying to accomplish. Their approaches are characterized as a mighty iron fist strong enough to kind of rip apart this vice-like grip that crime essentially has on its constituents, its communities. And no one ever wants to be viewed as someone that is not willing to do and fight for justice. More often than not, this approach has worked to achieve the goal of election, yet it has failed to eradicate the seeming rise in crime, and it has contributed to what now exists as the massive conveyor belt of recidivism. Also, something that you spoke to earlier is just the disparities that exist within communities of people of color that are most predominantly impacted by the criminal justice system and who are the main faces of mass incarceration. So, as I mentioned earlier, nonviolent drug offenses are usually the quick buzzwords that we associate with mass incarceration. However, the issue runs so much deeper than that. In fact, the contributing factors that I present to you today reflect even more how the disparities of equitable socioeconomic resources has helped grow the prison population. Some of these contributing factors are probation and parole violations, lack of financial means to pay bail or fines, immigration status, misdemeanor offenses with disproportionate consequences, untreated mental health or drug abuse issues, are some of the main reasons that people are currently experiencing confinement. I think in saying all of that, I kind of want to give you a more specified scope of how many people are actually impacted and currently experiencing confinement within the United States. So I'm just going to read off a couple of numbers. Since its inception in 1891, the prison system has grown exponentially. Its growth is directly tied to our country's ideology of justice. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, as of this year, our prison system holds almost 2 million people across 1,566 state prisons, 98 federal prisons, 3,116 local jails, 1,323 juvenile correctional facilities, 181 immigration detention facilities, and 80 Indian country jails, as well as in military prisons, civil commitment centers, state psychiatric hospitals, and prisons in the U.S. territories. So those numbers, I feel like we don't necessarily get a real scope of who that's impacting unless we are impacted ourselves, unless we know someone that is currently experiencing confinement, or obviously ourselves if we're in that. It's easy just to rattle off numbers. It's easy for people to sit around and kind of discuss what the problem is. I think that within the government and even in spaces like this, I've just demonstrated the fact that I can sit here and I can identify a problem. I can go on Google and I can research some facts and I can string them together and I can, regurgitate them back to you. But are we essentially in society, my question is, have we created and are we maintaining space for actionable solutions? I think one of the things that I learned in my undergrad time, and something that one of our professors really pushed us to do, is to not just talk about what we can identify in terms of, okay, well, I see this as a problem, and I can go on and on and on and on about what contributes to this, who is at fault, sorry, I'm kind of like losing my train of thought, but it's very difficult to actually sit down and say, okay, well, what would we like to do about it? And that was something that we had to do with each of our reading discussions each week. We had to come up with questions, but then we were challenged to figure out, well, what would be the solution towards that question? Yes.
If I could ask a
Yeah.
question, is there any incentive to actually solve these problems? Or is the incentive for politicians to get votes? So by saying they're tough on crime, they get elected, and that's their incentive. The other incentive that seems to be at play is money. There's a lot of money going into these private prisons, and even judges get money, kickbacks and such. That's been documented a lot. So where's the incentive to actually solve the problems that you're talking about? I mean, you're talking about sitting down, let's solve these problems. There seems to be no incentive to actually do that.
Well, I think, and this is something that Terrance spoke about earlier as well, we have politicized the idea of empathy, of rehabilitation. I think COVID and the response that we had during our former president's administration was we trivialized the idea that caring about other people was in essence going to detract from what we could do for ourselves. And I think the prison system is one of the prime examples of that, of we have created this big conglomerate almost, this monster that kind of exists outside of ourselves. And we're so used to, and much throughout our history, our Constitution and kind of things that have come up in recent years that we as citizens challenge, I think that it has gone so far as to it exists, and therefore, even though it's a little broken, even though there's a couple broken windows in there, maybe there are some things that need to be tied up, it's more challenging, I think, for the people that we've elected, whose job it is to sit in rooms like these and to have these conversations and to work through these solutions and figure out what is kind of the right way or right direction to go into. I think that people just don't want to do that work, kind of for the reasons that you mentioned, where there are money incentives and there are reasons for, peddling these particular narratives in order to get voted in. But I just feel that it's become this massive thing that people are just too afraid to kind of step in the opposite direction. If we have a governmental candidate that's coming up and they're saying, I want to make sure that, people that are massively incarcerated, that they get reduced sentences if they meet this criteria. If they, getting education, other mental health services, like really peddling those things. I don't believe that we as a society, while we are, I think we're ever adaptable and there are more people similar in thinking to us where, we just want people to be able to contribute to society. Like, yes, you get a little spank on the hand, you're told that this is not the right thing to do, But if you remove the education from it, if you remove the social work aspect that goes into teaching these people and providing them with the resources so that they create successful pathways after leaving prison, I just think that we're just going to continue to recycle the problem. But I'll, default to Terrance.
The fact that we are having a moral, how do we incentivize a moral issue has always been a problem for me. However, I will say this. During the 2020 elections, Elizabeth Warren ran on, part of her platform was on criminal justice reform. I don't know if you guys could go back and, for us who may see this, and we look at the issues of criminal justice reform in this country, it became a national conversation. I think that what happens and what's happening right now that even has a space such as this and so many other places in the country, I think that there is a societal shift in what we originally believed about our country as a whole. I think that there's a shift that is becoming a bit more empathetic to the issues, the social issues that are impacting the lives of men and women across the country, which is why we're beginning to see the decarceration within our criminal legal system, which when we're hearing all these conversations. And I hate to say what I'm about to say, but it goes back to how it was just mentioned that these issues become politicized. Because to be perfectly honest with you, remember earlier I mentioned that it was the Clinton administration, the Democrat then Senator Joe Biden, that penned the '94 crime bill. And it was, 30 years later, 2020 campaign, here we are, and Hillary Clinton, out of all people, that told white America that these black and brown folks are super predators when, she, in 2016, all of this was taking place. And the reason her campaign came under fire during that time was because what everyone was saying, wait a minute, you're the wife of the individual that signed this bill that led to what we now know as mass incarceration that disproportionately impacted black and brown communities across this country. And she began to formulate how she would, as president, address the same issue that was introduced. So when we think about the idea of these issues being incentivized and how do we do that, right now, the Booker administration, Cory Booker, set forth what he referred to as the Reverse Mass Incarceration legislation, or the Reverse Mass Incarceration Act, that would incentivize states the same way they expanded the criminal legal system, that they would allocate $10 billion to states and agencies that would decarcerate, the efforts within their states to decarcerate, as well as fund a lot of the nonprofits that are working with these justice-impacted communities and those individuals. So that piece of legislation is there. But I do have to say, one of the problems, again, and I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders. I don't care what nobody says.
You're feeling the burn.
I'm feeling the burn. The reason and Bernie Sanders is so respected in this work is because whether Bernie Sanders wins the seat or not, Bernie Sanders is still committed to the issues that he has set forth throughout his entire career. And for me, when I look at a lot of politicians today, I see that these issues become a political hot topic for them. Politicians, unfortunately, in my opinion, sometimes change with the social winds. What's chick for this season of election? So as we sit here now, there are numerous issues that are taking place right here in our country, from the LGBT community, from women's rights to trans rights. We go down the list of things, and unfortunately, for some, these issues become talking points for votes. And I don't know how deep that commitment is to the actual communities or effectuating change on behalf of how we're engaging with marginalized populations within our society. So I'll stop there. I probably said a lot. I don't know.
You did, do you mind if I?
Yeah, please.
So, I think what I'm hearing is, the importance of us trying to find steps we can take.
Yes.
I think that's what I'm hearing from Naya. And I think that the thing about, we can't help but be involved with politics, right? I mean, it's the nature of our lives. The only way not to be involved with politics is to not be alive. I mean, right?
Exactly.
That's the only, option B is not being here. So, so option A is that we're all here and we're all political beings. And I think that, there's this ongoing pressure in today's world especially for us to be very aware of the policies. And then to hold the people that we voted in accountable. But that means a lot of work on our part, you know, on your everyday person's part. So I'm just gonna pick up on one thing. I think there's been a lot of evidence that it's gonna save everybody a lot of money if we focus more on all the things that you've been talking about, which is restorative justice and having educational programs and making sure that we bring people back into the community as soon as possible. You know, that that needs to be rewarded. We have to make sure we have a way of rewarding both the programs that do that kind of work and rewarding the people that become involved in that work.
But as we do that, and it's important that I say this, that when we think about the criminal legal system as we know it, and we think about reentry, and we think about et cetera, we can go down the list of what happens after that. I think it's important that we understand prior to the criminal legal system that the communities were criminalized.
Oh, yes, I agree.
And the practices within that community, not only just as it relates to law enforcement, our criminal justice system, but just in the social construct of that. And again, the narrative. When we talk about inner city schools, and we talk about the school to prison pipeline, we have a direct place we can go and say where this happened. And we can go back to the Reagan administration. Anyone remember the welfare queen? That people were receiving money and they were taking all the money and their kids, et cetera, and they were buying that was a narrative that was sold that allowed us to say, yes, we need to cut funds into those communities because all they're doing is buying clothes and jewelry and bags, and the little children are.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have to go back to Reagan. It's happening right now. I mean, look at food stamps. We just had food stamps cut back.
Exactly.
I mean, basically.
And when we start, and this is why I utilize these spaces in time where we can begin to see a methodology as it relates to narratives that forces us as taxpayers. Because think about it, if we're paying into a system and I think that my money is being spent on clothes, we're more apt to oppose anything that expands that. So I think it's important that as we continue to have these conversations, one of the first things is that we have to take back the pen and start rewriting the narrative. We have to begin to have conversations like this, similar to what we're doing today, that begins to educate our community, because most of my colleagues who I've worked with, they will say to me, we want to help, we just don't know how to help. And I think that it bears on us to ensure that we're providing spaces to educate our communities on the principles of a lot of policies that we're supporting or not supporting because of a narrative that we're hearing. So I think that becomes a critical space. Secondly, I think that one of the things that we need to understand as a group that Tennessee did it for me. I can tell you, I can go to no other place for us to look at a model that we can begin to follow as a society with these two elected officials. It wasn't solely those two elected, it was the people that came out and raised their voices in reference to not only gun violence, but also how we began to deal with issues, and those elected officials are those who are set to represent us as a people or constituents. And I think that for the work that we're doing here in this space as it relates to our criminal legal system and restorative justice, that we have a responsibility to continue to raise the narrative, raise the concerns, as well as, you're like me, I always tell my students, I like to protest and I'll do all that stuff and I'll march, but at the end of the day, we need to be bringing solutions to the table. And we have, and fortunately, we're in a space of time, we can be very creative and innovative with this, because unfortunately, because our criminal legal system for the past 50 years has ignored two of the primary functions as it relates to our pillars of our criminal legal system, which is rehabilitation and restoration. We have a prime opportunity to raise such conversations, to really begin to engage our communities as well as our students and our officials in these conversations on the best way to begin to address some of those issues that are taking place in those communities. And I will say lastly again, as Glenn Martin has taught me a long time ago, those who are closest to the problem are also those closest to the solutions, but the furthest from the power and resources. And I think it's important that as we set forth, we begin to empower those communities.
Okay, so both of you, both of you have firsthand examples.
Yes.
Firsthand examples. So I think it would be wonderful if you could both share your good examples. In other words, examples of programs and situations that were constructive and helpful. Sure. Right?
Yes. I guess, and I've listened so intently. So my mother, when I was 16 years old, was incarcerated for about 5 years. And during that time, she was lucky enough to be given the resources to enroll in the Osborne Association. It's a program that assists people that are currently incarcerated, or as well as their families, and then after they have come out of incarceration, to provide them with access to therapy services, assistance with resources such as employment, education, and other things like that. So during our time that we were within the program, my mother was housed upstate at a women's detention center, and she, it's not very easy for girls and their grandmother to consistently go visit. So the Osborne Association actually provided us with the opportunity to fly us there and back to go visit her. They did offer overnight accommodations, but also allowed us to just do same day visits. Once she was moved down to the city, which was over near Chelsea Pier, they had a facility that was there, but after Hurricane Sandy, I believe, that ended up being flooded and they no longer have it. They would also provide us with transportation from our home to the facility, kind of walk us through and support us through the process of being searched before we went to go see our mother, would stay there the entire length of our visit, and then be able to bring us back home. They'd also provide us and my mother with therapy services to kind of walk us through an unimaginable situation, especially for girls that are, going through different stages of their development, to be impacted by incarceration in this way, especially with their primary parent. They also provided video visits. So when we weren't flying back and forth when she was upstate, they would allow us to speak with her over like a video chat situation, which was also very nice. And then they provided the children, there were other children that were enrolled, to, opportunities to go see Broadway plays and to go bowling, and kind of things that took you out of that particular scope, because that is your day-to-day. You're constantly concerned about, not being able to share that experience with the people that you're closest with. I know for my siblings and it was very difficult, and I think now in our adulthood, we're able to talk about this a little bit more and understand the situation that occurred. But it is a very isolating feeling. You don't have a lot of people that you can relate to, and it's a feeling of shame that you kind of take on as a person that is close to someone else that is incarcerated. But yeah, that was my experience. I think my mother having access to that particular program, as well as being able to start her degree. She has an associate's degree from Bard College as a result of being incarcerated. Prior to that, she did have I believe her high school diploma, and also went for training to become an EMT. But obviously, because of the incarceration situation, she wasn't able to continue her education as normal, but was able to enroll in a program like that. And it really did incentivize her to look for a different future outside of that. She did experience, mental health and substance abuse setbacks, which caused her to be incarcerated. So that opportunity of kind of having that hands-on of the people kind of keeping you accountable for the mistakes that you've made, or the mistakes that you feel that you've made, but also allowing you the opportunity to grow outside of that, I think has also set her up for, now she works with New York City Roadrunners, and she does the medical tent for that. She has worked in different sectors that she more than likely would not have had access to prior to this particular moment in time, as well as because of that time. I think she also experiences a bit of anxiety anytime that she has to explain to people why there might be gaps in her employment history, or if they were to do a background check, why that would come up. So that was my experience. I think it was very helpful, especially as a child, not really understanding what was happening and kind of how to navigate that situation. But I'll toss it to you.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to have a comment on that question.
Yeah.
I just want everybody to know that, and I don't know if you knew, that was only for state. If you're in the feds, you're not getting none of that. There's no nonprofit organization that's going to support your family to
Yeah.
go. There's no organizations out there giving that type of one-on-one assistance to the children. I mean, so that's just, that I try to put out there that that's a great experience, but that's not across the board.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just not what happens across the board.
And I think it's important, as Minerva just highlighted, that we see the discrepancies even within corrections as to how men and women are serviced upon release, which again begs the question for us as a group and as a society, where do we begin to break down those walls of engagement that we're servicing these people who are coming back to our communities, to be members of our communities. I think that in line with what was shared, for me, that engagement actually began during incarceration, when I had access to higher education. And the continuation of that, and it was one of the most, I think, liberating moments for me as a human being. I got my GED and I thought I had a college degree, but it inspired in me higher aspirations, something more that wasn't offered, that I can really say that wasn't really seen in the light of how I saw it in that point. And from there, which is why I talk about communities being criminalized in a lot of ways. However, after receiving my GED, I finally reached a point here where I came to a program called the Doe Fund, which is a comprehensive holistic program. And I think it's important that we identify these programs and help support them as they work with these returning citizens. Secondly, I think that one of the greatest highlights came, similar to what Minerva described. I was able to get involved with the program at John Jay, the Institute for Opportunities and Justice, that assisted in returning citizens in pursuing higher education. And all this went hand in hand, because during my experience at the Doe Fund, after spending over 19 years incarcerated, sometimes the narrative, we internalize, men and women, they will internalize the narrative that my life has no value. I'm a super, whatever that may look like, because we have to also, and I wish I could just say this one little sentence and that's it. But we have to also realize how that messaging from the Clinton administration at that time began to be internalized by society, where we talk about discriminatory practice in employment opportunities, housing opportunities, and we go down a list of things that we may take for granted because it's just there, but that scarlet letter follows these people. And again, we don't have to go far. It was in 2016 that New York City, one of the most diversified, liberal spaces in the country, we had just passed the Fair Chance Act. The Fair Chance Act, which made it illegal for employers to discriminate against individuals with criminal backgrounds. How do we expect these people to come out and not even be able to work at a McDonald's? McDonald's, I'm not down, but so those are some of the challenges that we continue to face. Through the program with John Jay, I was able to access an opportunity where I started my academic career at Bronx Community College. And from there, because I was, I found purpose in my life. I found purpose, and from there, I excel academically, and the next thing I know, I'm getting a scholarship opportunity through NYU's prison program, in which I, was able to secure, and I went on to earn my undergrad and graduate degree, which now, after all of that, my life comes full circle, where now I teach at Wallkill Correctional Institution through the New York University Prison Education Program, because what I recognized in myself is that my life as an adjunct lecturer, as a graduate of New York University, and the list of things and the opportunities that I've been afforded, my life should not be an anomaly. My life, this should be common practice as we see in other criminal systems throughout the world, because we can look at Europe and see they have a very different approach to how they deal with those individuals who are impacted by the criminal legal system. So I could say that is where, for me, that began at the good story.
Well, that's a good story, and also I think it would be interesting to know how these good programs were funded.
Oh, yeah, well, a lot of them, similar to the Doe Fund, and we'll switch over. The Doe Fund, they had a multi-streams of funding. There was business partnerships that they established with the community, because remember, and this is why you guys just keep opening these Pandora doors to me, man, to have these other, because some of these conversations they're just a whole conversation by themselves. When we talk about community, it strikes me that in the past, I think 5 years, even with our current new DA, who Alvin Braggs, who's leading, all that's going on, but his office has committed itself to assisting those men and women who are coming into the criminal legal system, not just solely looking at them through the lens of locking them up, but what programs can we support that best service these people? Community. So when we talk about community, I think that it comes a point where we have to begin to redefine what that community looks like. And that community looks like our business partners. That community looks like our religious institutions within our community. Those communities look like our academic institutions. We have to begin to redefine what that looks like, create a space such as this where we're bringing everyone in with solutions on how can we help best service this marginalized group, because that individual is going to impact our lives one way or another. And it's important as we have these conversations. I always talk about when we're talking about decarceration and we're talking about reentry and all these wonderful and restorative justice, it's equally important that we understand what recidivism looks like in this country, and right here in our state. So those are some other issues I think that as we continue to have these conversations, as we continue to engage in these spaces, that we begin there with redefining what that looks like for as a community, and how do we play a role in helping shape what that community looks like in response to what's happening in our society.
So Minerva, I think you said that you're also somebody who knows quite a bit about the criminal justice system.
Just a little bit, no.
No,
So
I think you said
spent,
you know something.
system. And it amazes me every time I come to these spaces and people tell me, you know, they're wonderful stories of the experience, and it's just, that wasn't my case. I had college before I went in, so I wasn't, cause mind you, when you take your GED, it's mandatory. So if, let's say a woman that was incarcerated was not passing because she had mental health, they punish you. You get punished. You cannot go to commissary. You get no privileges until you pass that GED. And once you pass the GED, okay, what next? They're not letting you go to college because that costs money. There was no Pell, there was no TAP. There was no organization coming into the Fed saying, you know, hey, we're a school. There's no NYU PEP. There wasn't a bar coming there to say, hey, we're here to serve some of the populations. None of that. You wanted to go to school, you had to get approval, your family had to pay for it, and so forth. You couldn't just get the books, here they are, study and send it to us. No, you gotta go to a counselor. If she feels like working and having that type of caseload, then she might approve it. And so when I went there, I knew school wasn't for me. I did 10 years, I think I went to 10 institutions, because now you're talking about money, right? I was in this town, Alderson, where they said Martha Stewart was at. I was in Alderson prison, Alderson town, and I met Officer Alderson. Literally, the family. You know who wasn't there? McDonald's, right? No, there was no Pizza Hut, no McDonald's, no nothing, because these towns are so small that they need us there as to populate that community. So I didn't understand it, right? In conversation, it sounds good until I lived it. I'm in Con Air. 1 minute my security level goes up, the next it goes down. Next thing you're getting packed up, and you're going to different prisons. Throughout my 10 year, I'm just here, I'm there, I'm here, I'm over there.
You said 9?
Excuse me?
You went to 9 different
About
prisons.
9 and 10.
Wow.
And then you understand, I went to like transit centers, then you go to these small town holding centers. So you're just being sent from prison to prison. So let's say I was studying, my family was like, fine, let me never finish college. At any point, you could be transferred. And so that goes to waste. The whole semester gone. Because by the time I got to the prison that they wanted me to go, I'm 3-4 months down in my transit, going from different transit centers to go to different places. And once I was taken out of New York, I didn't see my family. And there was just no way for them to just continue to go to Virginia, continue to go to all these other little towns, because I was in private prisons. So you're gonna come to see me through a glass or through a mirror. This didn't make any sense. So the contact was just gone. Once I left, I think like Connecticut. So
What's
like
your
6 years without no physical contact. So it didn't make sense. And then when I came home to try to get programming, right? It was only John Jay and where I'm working now, College Community Fellowship, that actually assisted me, because the first thing they ask you, now I'm another number, right? I'm a folder that goes from one organization to another organization. Oh, you got a Fed number. Well, we don't service federal inmates because we don't get no money. The state of New York does not get money for federal inmates.
Wow.
And so I was like, oh, okay. So, you know, I went to college, I finished that, and I was on my own. I never met my probation officer.
Oh my
It was in
God.
the midst of COVID. At this point, you do everything online. I gave him so many degrees and so many diplomas throughout my time home. I never met this person.
Oh my God.
And why am I still on federal probation, you know? But it's money.
So the
It's
federal
money.
the federal system's worse than the state.
Oh, definitely.
I didn't
When
know.
I hear these
No, I
stories,
just
I mean,
didn't
to
know.
be in it, the only difference is, you know, they're federal facilities, so some are better, right? Some are better, but from what I hear, but the programming is different. It's really different in regards to programming, and state money and federal money is very different as well.
What are your feelings about private prisons?
Oh, they're horrible.
It seems like a
Oh my
It seems
God,
like a
they're
racket to me.
horrible.
Yeah, but I think that when we talk about private prisons, you know, I think this is also in the line of what we refer to as the prison industrial complex, where historically, when we look at it, we call it convict leasing back of, you know, in the days after slavery. And it's the same construct that we have businesses that have a vested interest within our criminal legal system for one particular reason only, and that's the labor that they get from the state and federal government for these people. And now, I like to bring you guys right back to New York. We don't have to go. Michael Bloomberg, I'm sure you guys know that name. During his political campaign, what was it? 2016, I think, when he was running for president, if I'm not, 2020? There was a report that came out that his campaign was utilizing prison labor to make campaign calls on his behalf.
Oh my God.
And the same people do not have the right to vote in the very country so it's that type, and that practice isn't just isolated. And I will say for Mr. Bloomberg, if he happens to see this, that he did discontinue that, but that group was utilizing prison labor. We can talk about COVID under the former Cuomo administration that was utilizing prison labor to make the hand sanitizer that we all were so comfortably using, but those same men and women within those correctional institutions were not allowed to use that because it had alcohol in it.
Oh my God.
So when we talk about exploiting this population, we talk about exploitation practices that are taking place, I think, again, it's critically important that we have these conversations in a very realistic way that, brings the reality to what that looks like for these men and women exiting these facilities, as well as those who are there. I believe that, and the reason I support educational programs within correctional institutions, because empirical data has shown that if an individual who's incarcerated has access to education, it goes from 25% with the AA degree, 50%, 75%, and nearly non-existent the higher they receive academic achievement. We're paying into the future if we invest smartly and wisely.
So Minerva, I have a question, because I didn't know it was this terrible.
Oh, I have one more thing to add to that. So I didn't know too, so when, even now, they're having the stop the packages. Your family cannot send you
I've heard
whatever
that.
they want, right? But when I was in there, I didn't know Coffee, the Bush family owns Coffee. So now all these little foods that we are allowed to buy in there, we started finding out who owns this? Because I'm not drinking Coffee in the street. I want Bustelo or whatever, Maxwell House.
Right.
And so even these private labels, and now we have to spend our money in there. The list goes on and on.
No, the list for ripoff goes on and on.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering about actually is if you are currently involved in any, let's say, just blowing the lid off
Advocacy, I'm an
issues.
artivist, yes.
Okay,
I
so
definitely
please.
am. I think we have to definitely educate our community because the changes, they're coming, but the changes is coming. When? How? I think if we're not voting, sure. If we're not civically engaged, I give a lot of civic education courses right now in the Bronx because that's the lowest civic engagement in the 5 boroughs. I teach women who are justice impacted. I teach their family, children. So that has been my goal to actually just train people on what our rights are, how we can do policy changes. We go to Albany all the time as well. So I try to do my part. I
So on
definitely
this
do.
federal, do you have any, I'm just blown away by how much worse the federal system is. I just didn't know it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't. I had to live it.
So, do you have any thought about how this could be elevated in terms of exposed?
So check this out. We are having discussions now, right, with the Eastern Southern District and the Eastern and the Southern District of New York, which are the 2 federal courts. And so they are kind of trying to make some sort of changes and reaching out. Terrance and I from the Social Justice Network actually go into are trying to have relationship with core services, which are they're private own halfway houses that have contracts with the federal government and actually talk to the men and women that are in there to try to give them some sort of support and some sort of services. But again, we're doing this out of
Voluntary.
basically. There is no programs out there actually going in there. It's like this private community of reentry, right? It's like a whole little world. I was in the reentry community. If you don't know somebody who knows somebody, something really out there. Like, what am I Googling for? What am I searching for to really help me? And again, the Doe Fund is great, but that's for men. It's for men. I can't say I'm coming home and you're gonna take me, or there's just even fewer programs when it comes to women.
Right, I think that's why for work of the social justice network, we have been speaking with state leaders here, Mr. Nucci and Mr. McCoy, who head the programs for the state of New York. And our goal is to take conversations such as these and translate them into a program model that speaks to the needs of those men and women who are coming home. As Minerva said, for a lot of men and women who are getting released, right? And remember, we don't have to go far. I'm going to keep you right here in New York, who are released from our state correctional institutions. These men and women are being released with a bus ticket, $40 and a bus ticket, and they're dropped off on 34th Street. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 years incarcerated. On their day of release, they're given a bus ticket, $40, and they're dropped on 34th Street.
So,
Go ahead.
I'm always trying to think how to make things better. So right now, in terms of, I'm aware of the Vera
Institute?
Do they do
Vera?
Vera.
Ah!
Forget about it. Okay.
I mean, they're great for
No.
newsletters and policies, but
Mm.
on the ground booth
They're-
work, where are they?
So on the grounds boots work is pretty much missing.
It's missing. Like, even like for Terrance and I, when we say we're gonna go to these institutions, they're sending Terrance paperwork. Like, okay, you gotta get a background check. We need your fingerprints. Terrance, we can't even go into these halfway houses to service them until you're given a whole background check.
So I have I'm gonna say this because of the community church being in the room. I'm thinking there might be some way of partnerships with different institutions like community church.
Always.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
always.
and I think that before, yeah, what we want to do, and we've already pitched this to the Department of Corrections, and we've already pitched this to Rikers Island. We currently will be going into Core Services, Brooklyn Transitional House, where I give presentations to the men and women there who are incarcerated. One of the things that we want to do is establish what we refer to as our reentry assistance program. And the reentry assistance program is a pre-assessment of a client
Right.
who are already, but prior to being released,
prior.
we want to use technology the same way that we did during COVID to be able to conduct pre-assessments of needs on those men and women. What boroughs are they're living in? What are their interests? How can we get them connected to the organizations upon their release? How can, we want to have all that stuff worked out. So on the day that individual is released, he's not coming out with $40 on bus ticket and dropped off. He's already connected to an agency. He's connected, like Minerva said, for some women who may be getting out at the federal or state level who can't go to the Doe Fund, during that 1 year while we're doing the pre-assessment, we'll be already reaching out to organizations on behalf of that individual. So when she gets out,
What feels really super sad to me is that, again, I'm older than you guys, but it used to be that this is what happened. In the people, I used to work in the criminal justice system here in New York City, and if somebody was incarcerated, the people like myself, social worker, we started working with the person way before they came out. So by the time they came out, we had a set of programs waiting for them.
I'm gonna give you this example. This is my thing. So I went to
I know this
cosmetology
too.
school in West Virginia, Alderson. But you know how I got in? Because guess who puts you on the waiting list? The white girl that's been there for eons amount of years, and her friends are gonna go first. So I was the minority of the minority. I'm Latino. So Virginia's populated by whites, and so I had to write them up. When was the last time you had a Latino Tina in this program, and that's how I got in. You know, but again, it's like the bureaucracy in there. It's not going to be the social worker or the counselor to assist, because all she said is get on the waiting list. It's like, this ain't just waiting list.
Yeah, so
It's going to take forever.
So, no, it totally sucks, I understand that.
We-
And
I
then
appreciate that it
to get
sucks.
the jobs,
Yes,
that's another thing.
okay, so.
We had an event like this years ago, and we had somebody actually very much like you, very articulate and suit and tie and
Oh.
just college degree and all that jazz. And he talked about the people that were in solitary confinement. And he was saying, you know, there are people that have been in solitary confinement for years. The UN has said more than 15 days is torture.
Yes.
And people have been, and he said, imagine somebody that's been in solitary confinement for years and drops off at the Port Authority and gets sent out into society. How is that person going to cope?
Yeah, I mean, that's, and again, we don't have to go far. It was only right here in New York, we just passed legislation that limited how the use of solitary confinement right here, the trend. That's New York. And I think that we have an obligation to have these conversations.
Service-oriented. I think we should all be much more focused on outreach and engagement with exactly this situation, where we get in, where it doesn't have to be just on you guys volunteering.
When I came home, right, 10 years, I'm a big girl, right? Everyone who donates for
Skinny little
from
thing.
downtown.
Skinny little thing.
So we walked away with some makeup and a bag. Thank you, Justin. It's just like thanks. So, you know, we take that into consideration. You're coming out of prison, you've been there forever, so that account goes to the government.
So maybe settlement houses, we have to do more.
Yeah, there's a lot more that needs to be done. I do jump in because a lot of what the both of you have been speaking about is this, what I feel is America's culture is deeply ingrained in this idea of struggle. And I mentioned this to Bruce earlier, of like this idea that, you know, everybody starts off in the same space and you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you just keep persevering. And I think that mass incarceration, or just the incarceration system, is it was created on that foundational thought that people are, you know, you've done this wrong thing, we've identified you, we've called you out, we've said that this is the amount of time that you need to be away from people. We've stripped people of humanity by giving them a number and you're no longer a name. You don't have access to these things. You have to buy your way into these things. Being able to get, you know, foods, or being able to, you know, work. There's a bunch of things that you have to kind of force yourself into these spaces. And then you're then released. And then it's kind of like, well, here you are. These are the decisions that you made. This was the punishment that you had. These are the circumstances that you have now. Figure it out. But we're not talking about the fact that even prior to being in that situation, for many people, they already didn't have that
Exactly.
access to that. So now you're telling me, even when I was free, that I was supposed to somehow find access to these resources and create the successful pathway so that I didn't end up in this situation. And now I have been punished, and now I'm back where I started. If not worse, because now I have gaps in this time period of when I could have been a productive member of society had I had access to the resources that I needed. And now I have even more of a stamp on myself of otherness. And I think that the prison system, it just doesn't create not having access to being able to see your family because you're, you know, in another space. You're constantly moved around. Nothing is yours. There's nothing being taught there. So saying like you came from a broken community, as an example, and then you're being put in a place that also creates this disjointed community because you're, you know, not trusting of other people. You're not really allowed to congregate in ways that naturally, as human beings, we want to connect with others. Part of the issue of why most people end up in incarceration is because they weren't able to connect with others. and then continuing that distance to before and go right back through this cycle. I don't think that there's a lot of, again, there's always opportunities to talk about what the problem is, but just gonna put a stamp on it. Everybody gets this because they did this wrong. They went against this, like the rule book, and now everybody has like amount of time that you'll get on a varying degree based on what you've done. But at the end of the day, this is what happens to you. We know that for certain. But then there isn't the like the conversation or the actionable solutions behind that of, okay, well, what do we do to help these people? I think multiple methods pulled rehabilitation. If we don't express any sort of empathy towards others and not have it some sort of like, or just sort of like, oh, well, I'm a good person, I'm an ally, I get a gold star. We shouldn't be worried about our what we get out of our connection with helping other people. I think earlier you spoke about the like defining community, and I think that also a product of the American culture is that we don't consider ourselves a community until we're able to gather together to point at something that somebody else is doing wrong. So we are this like amazing nation and like all of these things that we're able to do when another country is doing something like that we don't agree with. We are a community only when there's people that are within that community that are disrupting our harmony. Although we might not interact with each other, we might not even have spaces in which we're able to come together as a community. But we can all collectively say, okay, well, morally, we know this to be true, and so this person is deviating from that, so we can all kind of, en masse, gang up on that particular situation. I just feel that we've just taken the humanity, the morality out of being human, and recognizing that while we do look different and we do come from different backgrounds, that it's very vitally important to recognize that we're all connected in some way. We're all living life for the first time. We're all living in the same spaces. And why we don't believe that we have some sort of responsibility collectively to help other people and to invest into our society in that way. I mean, we have conversations about global warming. It's a very nice day today, but it's also April. It should not be 85 degrees. But we politicize all of these things because there's some stake that we have in it that keeps us on the opposite end versus in alignment with each other. I mainly wanted to say that I just think that we're just scratching the surface. I think enough people are becoming unsettled about certain things and certain conversations, including this one, but we're just scratching the surface at actually creating a space and maintaining a space for us to actually do something about it, and to understand and recognize that it's not just going to be one particular thing. We're drawing from a lot of things and a lot of different people's experiences in order to create something more harmonious and something that doesn't continue to dehumanize people. So that was my little soapbox on that subject.
Any thoughts, questions? Peggy, Safed?
Well, thank you very much for the presentations. I was just thinking, have the right paperwork in place, multiple harassments, or disappeared into the federal system. So I was just thinking under Trump again, the idea of a genesis with the whole Muslim ban, which families were literally broken apart. Grandfathers that were separated from their children had been here for many years because they didn't have the right paperwork in place. And the second thing is just reflecting on the issue of solitary confinement. One of the organizations that the former organization I used to work with alongside North America helped to co-found was the National Religious Campaign Against Torture in ERCAT. And I serve currently on the board of ERCAT with Reverend Ron Steve and others. And the focus there is on solitary confinement. And one of the largest cases, this is sort of, I just want to get your views on the intersectionality of Islam. Imam Jamil Al-Amin was one of my teachers. H. Rap Brown, he's known as. If he dissed the name Imam Jamil Al-Amin and he remained with H. Rap Brown, there would be a lot more folk embracing him in this situation. Solitary confinement, denied a due process, denied the proper justice, the proper system by which he could defend himself. Separated from his families out in the Midwest. And, you know, many of his community members are sort of hands being tied in many different ways by those who were supposed to work with them to advocate, but because he is Imam Jamil El-Amin, and he refuses to step away from that and embrace H. Rap Brown, even some of his old folks and companions, you know, say, well, we're not there. I was at the Parliament of World Religions we have a new board member in Chicago's board meeting about a month ago or less, and Bobby Rush, Senator Bobby Rush, is a member of the group. And Bobby Rush told me on this side, you know, there was a special law that was set up for H. Rap Brown. I said, his name's Imam Jamil El-Amin. He said, I know. But, you know, we appreciate and we honor him. I said, well, what has been done for him? And then he was a little bit quiet when I spoke with him on the side. And I have tremendous respect for the work that Bobby Rush had done. But once again, the late Dr. Suleiman Yang, who was the chairman of the Department of African Studies for many, many years at Howard University. He used to say Muslims get a double whammy. Mostly, and I'm a little bit different because I'm a Bosnian, so I have the white color better and different. But my when it comes in, it complicates matters in a big way. And the Muslim